welcome back to The Price of Business. I'm your host, Chris Kelso, filling in for Kevin Price. And in studio right now, we have a really good friend of mine, great individual. His name is Bill Knapik with Stewart Title. Bill, how you doing, bud?
Doing great, Chris.
You know, one of the things we're talking about today, actually one of the things we've been really talking about a lot, is about improving your business and, setting goals, setting opportunities. We're coming in, obviously, to a 2015. Everyone's been talking about 2014. It's been absolutely great. But 2015, we're all anticipating will hopefully be even better. I know you and I have goals that we both want to achieve, but talk a little bit, first of all, let our listeners know a little bit about who you are and what you do. Let's go into some of that.
Yes, sir, Chris. As far as what I do, I've developed business for Stewart Title, focusing on the Post Oak Galleria and the Heights location. In addition, for Stewart Title, as you know, and I'll share with the listeners, host a radio show for them called Real Estate Matters with Stewart Title, and I am the host. Of course, you've been on the show, too. We've had some great guests. Yes. People can hear that show at stewart.com/Houston. In addition, I also started up, and this was one of my goals for 2015, but started here at the end of the year, was to have a second radio show called Successful Living with Bill Knapik, and that show comes on Saturday at 4 o'clock. You can hear it on the radio station KKHT website. But as we talk about success in our business plans, I'll tell you, two things came to the forefront. 14 was absolutely great, very busy, and I hate to hear people when they say, "Oh, I'm so busy." That is the mantra, so I really try never to say it, but it was very active, and I'm like you. I'm looking forward to a great 15, but there are two things that I'm looking at to really improve the business, my business at Stewart, the radio shows, and even my personal life.
What are the two things you're looking at?
Those two, I'm glad you asked that question. Those two, really, I tried to simplify because I've got to stay simple. But one, first of all, is to focus. And even in my childhood, I must have had ADD. I don't know that they knew what that was back then. But two things about me. I have a lot of interests, but I have to really concentrate on focusing more. And I'm going to do that at this time in my life for business purposes and also just to keep things straight. But I'm really going to focus on being focused and on the one thing, whatever I'm working on, I'm going to do my best to stay right on it and not get distracted. So I have to fight distractions.
One of the things I talk about all the time is the myth of multitasking. And so that goes into really what you're talking about right there.
Absolutely.
Most of the time people sit there and go, I'm a multitasker, right? Which the only thing it really means is you're doing everything sort of half-focused.
Exactly.
So it's better to focus in. I tell everybody all the time, it's better to get focused in on one thing, do that right through the end of the process, then move on to the next one. It's not to say you can't do multiple items in a single day, but the whole myth of being able to talk on the phone, drive, have somebody in the back seat, and give your children something, I'm using that as an analogy
Sure.
right there, isn't really the best way to do things. And so I like that aspect of getting into 2015. It's focus. Focus on what's important. Focus on focusing.
Laser focus. And when you talk about that, as you know, in the real estate profession, I guess it was Gary Keller the last year or so had the book called The One Thing.
Right.
I started to read it, but I couldn't stay focused. So it's like, wait, that's when I knew I had a problem.
Well, that's always good. So focus is one. What's your second one?
The second thing is to be a better listener. And that's not to say, Chris, to listen more,
right,
but to really be a better listener. And I determined that just a few weeks ago. And oddly enough, as life is, I picked up a book by Richard Branson. I think it's called The Virgin Way, and that is his newest book. And it's either the first or second chapter. He talks about listening from a business perspective, and also as a individual. He talks about the value of listening, and he brings something. This comes under the category, I would say, of things that are obvious to us in life, but we just didn't see them, or at least I didn't see it. But he points out the importance of listening. But he says the word "listen," if you rearrange, he says, first of all, we're designed to listen more with two ears and one mouth, right?
That is correct.
But he said the word "listen," if you rearrange the letters, they spell silent.
Really?
Yeah. Again, it's been in front of me my whole life, but I never rearranged those letters. And yet, if you rearrange the letters one more time, it spells another word, and that is enlist. So I'm going to enlist better listening skills for 2015 and what's left of 2014.
Well, and you mentioned something. My granddad, when I was real little, used to always tell me, son, you're born with two ears and one mouth. You're supposed to listen twice as much as you speak. I try to do that, but obviously being on the radio, as you know, Bill, sometimes it's pretty hard.
Well,
for
the
us to
radio,
do.
we've got to talk.
But one of the things that's true though, and I tell everybody, it's not just about listening; it's about understanding what you're listening to. Because oftentimes in business, people are telling you something, and because you're not listening to what they're telling you, you end up missing the mark. You end up not following through on something that was important to them because you didn't listen what was important to them. You listened to what they wanted, but not necessarily what was going to make them happy. And so those are some things sometimes that you have to end up doing is you have to listen, you have to understand, and you have to act upon what you ended up learning from that conversation.
Absolutely. And the two things I'm working on are actually tied together because what you're saying is listening. Focus is a very important part of listening. And sometimes I know personally, as I'm talking to someone and I hear what they're saying, I might want to jump and respond quicker than I should and not make that pause and make sure they're finished. So, and also on the radio, as we're interviewing, you're interviewing me, I guess, and we interview people on the radio. I think it's also and that's another part where that's going to help me this year to make sure that I get the most and let people say what they're going to say without interruption and then come in at the right time. So
it's important, and also from a business perspective. I mean, you're obviously with Stewart Title, a very, very good, large company. You're actually in the Heights office, beautiful office there on the Heights. And listening is very important in the real estate business. Why? Because there's so many little details that can actually slip through the crack. You talk about focus and listening skills. It's extremely important to be able to understand what the needs of the client are, what the needs of the agent are, both listing and buying side, and also understand what the client ultimately ends up needing based on the contract they ended up signing.
Absolutely. And from as far as promoting Stewart Title all over Houston, certainly I do that on the radio show and sometimes beyond, as we're not just in Houston with 30-some locations, but all over the U.S.
That is correct.
I will tell you, my approach to serving someone when I get to help them or have that opportunity is not to say, hey, I'm with Stewart Title, here's what we can do for you. No, I want to listen to find out what's important to them about the closing. If I'm talking to a realtor, to find out what's important to them, what they're looking for in the closing experience. So that way I could provide that, but also know before I just dump a bunch of features and benefits, let's say, about what we offer.
No, and that is true. Oftentimes we're always out there, and I tell everybody, we've been talking about this in the show, is you and I know each other. You and I have a great relationship. We've done business with each other, et cetera. But also that listening and focus is what's going to create future relationships for you to have with other individuals like me, real estate agents, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of times people forget this business is all about, business in general is about creating and forging relationships that then lead to bigger and larger things.
Absolutely. It's about the relationship. And if time were to permit, in fact, on the Successful Living show, I have it on my to do as far as one of the shows, but I go back, and I could tell you briefly, I think I go back to one of my first jobs. I think it was my first jobs. Well, my first one was selling greeting cards door to door, I think.
Right.
But at about age 11, I applied for a job in the newspaper where I saw Paperboy. I lived in a nice little town in Pennsylvania called Camp Hill near the capital of Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, across the river. Beautiful Norman Rockwell-ish sort of town. Well, anyway, they had a Market Street, and on that Market Street was a movie theater, a drugstore, and the neighborhood barber shop, Ed the Barber's. Well, anyway, I applied in the Camp Hill newspaper for Paperboy. I called up the guy. I said, hey, I'm Bill. I live on Logan Street. I want to apply for the Paperboy job. And the guy said, well, how old are you? And I think I was 11. Whatever it was, I was a year younger than you needed to be to deliver papers. So I told him my age. He said, sorry. He said, call me back next year. We'd love to have you. But anyway, so my mom heard this. So she calls up Ed the barber and says, Ed, my son's looking for a job. Ed says, send him up here and I'll put him to work. And the brief bullet point on that is I got to work with Ed, probably made about a quarter, 50 cents a day. I had the feeling of having money in my pocket.
Right.
Went there after school. But what I learned from Ed the barber, Ed built business by creating the relationship. When you went to get a haircut from Ed, you go in there, and he knew what to do. He knew to talk or not to talk or to listen. So when he had his customers sitting in the chair, he served them, gave them the haircut, listened, and then when they paid him, Chris, check this out, and I don't know if it was $1.25, $1.50 a haircut, but when he exceeded expectations. When you gave him that $1.50, He gave you a quarterback and said, thanks, I'll see you next time. But he created relationships.
Creating relationships. That's what we do all the time. Bill, we are running out of time for this segment. How can we reach you if you don't mind?
You can call me at 713-210-9767, 713-210-9767, and check out our show, Real Estate Matters with Stewart Title, at stewart.com/Houston. We've got about 50 shows on there. Check out the archives.
That is Bill Knapik with Stewart Title. Great individual, great shows, and let me tell you, a good purse, close and a friend of mine. Remember, you can always catch us on priceofbusiness.com, where you can hear this show and many, many more. Again, I am filling in for Kevin Price, and until next time, we are out.